Good evening, or afternoon depending when I schedule this video. Today we're going to talk about another historical might-have-been. Here's how it goes. Not too long ago I released a video about the early 90s plans for Crossrail, or, as we now call it, the Elizabeth Line. That version of the Elizabeth Line was similar but not identical to the one we've got. The two main differences were, firstly, that it had no branch to Abbey Wood, and secondly, that it did have a branch to Aylesbury. What particularly caught my eye was the fact that it seemed to be taking over part of the Metropolitan line of the London Underground. So what was that plan, what was the reasoning behind it, and why did it not go ahead? As it happened, I found my answer quite by accident while looking for something entirely different. I consulted two documents, both of which are available online. The first was the Central London Rail Study of 1989, and the second was the 2007 Crossrail Information Paper A1 Development of the Crossrail Route. Now, these papers do technically refer to two different versions of Crossrail, one being the planned one in the early 90s, the other being the one that was actually built this century. But between them, they give us our answers. So the basic plan was this. At Old Oak Common there would be a junction. Our line would branch off the Elizabeth Line in a tunnel and run to somewhere near Wembley Park. Then it would join the Chiltern Line and run all the way up to Aylesbury. It would call at Wembley Park, Harrow-on-the-Hill and Northwood, and beyond that it would call at all stations. This service would replace the Metropolitan line between Moor Park and Amersham, including the Chesham branch. The Metropolitan's western termini would now be Uxbridge and Watford. There was another version of the 2000s scheme that would have left Aylesbury alone and instead taken over the lines to Watford and Uxbridge, but that's another story. So the first question is why? What did the Metropolitan line ever do to Crossrail? Well, the 1989 report identified that there was overcrowding on the northern part of the Circle line, which is shared with the Metropolitan line. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's always overcrowding on the Circle line. But anyway, the thinking was that Crossrail would take some of the passengers off that section. Farringdon was identified as being in the crowded section, and Crossrail would have called there, as it does today. It was also anticipated that it would take passengers off the District and Central lines. The Chiltern Line, which runs partly alongside the Metropolitan and partly shares track with it, is to this day a line in need of an upgrade. It provides a route to Birmingham from London Marylebone. It's the only main line out of London not to be electrified. The feeling in this report was that better use could be made of this line. Putting it on Crossrail would necessitate that upgrade, and one presumes that the line into Marylebone would have to be similarly upgraded. If that was the case, then potentially Marylebone would become a more attractive station for commuters and, being near to Baker Street, would again take passengers off the Circle line. Now, I must admit, I am kind of speculating there. I just think Marylebone would be a useful thing to have. It's always handy to have a place where trains can be terminated on a busy line. The Chiltern Line, back in the late 80s, early 90s, was the responsibility of Network South East, who would have jointly run Crossrail with London Transport. So I think it's reasonable to assume that they would have made it all compatible. So once you get over the shock of losing part of the Metropolitan line, which admittedly is probably only shocking if you're a tube nerd like me, this makes a lot of sense. It wouldn't even be the first time the Metropolitan line was cut back. It used to run between Amersham and Aylesbury until 1961, when London Transport decided it wasn't worth the cost of electrification. All that being said, why didn't it happen when the rest of the 1990s scheme mostly did? Well, it all comes down to politics. Between 1994 and 1997, the railways of Britain were privatised. Before that, the Chiltern Line was run by Network South East, which was part of British Rail, which was answerable to the government. Thereafter, the network was divided up into a bunch of franchises whose primary concern was, well, keeping their shareholders happy. By 2007, the Chiltern Line was run by Chiltern Line. The Metropolitan Line, too, was now under the Metronet public-private partnership. Neither Chiltern Line nor Metronet were happy with the concept of losing a significant number of their trains, and therefore a significant chunk of their income, to this interloper. And that was it. That was the sole argument against it. It was considered otherwise to be both a useful line and an economically efficient one. But because it affected profits for the franchise holders, it could not go ahead. These days, the Chiltern route remains diesel, and at present there are no plans for full electrification. Instead, the plan is to refurbish the existing fleet, then to partially electrify the southern part of the line, with battery hybrid trains working beyond that. It feels like a half measure in a very real sense, particularly when you look at the fast and frequent trains of the Elizabeth line. Marylebone Station and the lines into it have a long history of getting the short end of the stick, and let's just say that this is fully in accordance with tradition. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this no longer a tube tale from the tube. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as I so often do, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the simplified management structure to my planned railway. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.